Last we left off, the party conversed with Miller and began their journey to go make tea. Pulling himself out of his trance once more, Quirin says, "Sir, I must admit that what brought me here was not the promise of riches, but that it gave me hope. Maybe along the way with solving this mystery, I will find answers to questions I have about my past." As they continued down the corridor, Quirin's expression would become troubled, and his voice would lower as it took on a hopeful tone. "I believe you understand what I'm trying to ask you, but please rest assured that regardless of your answer, I am ready to take on this quest. I cannot simply turn away your plea for help after learning what fate has met you and the people you cared for at the hands of those you once called family." He'd give Miller a reassuring smile before they'd reach the kitchen doorway. "Quirin, I cannot promise you much in the department of answers, but I will do my very best to track any ledgers that haven't been burned back to your past. One of the keystones could assist in this as well, but we will have to retrieve that another day, as I have not been able to track it myself just yet," he'd say to Quirin. He then gently motions for Vidalia and Quirin to stop. He turns his head to the side and says, "If anyone has any more questions or discussions, walk and talk with me, please. I'd like to prepare that tea and feel a bit safer in my own home." In the meantime, we'll follow Dion and his investigation. Dion enters the room he had been instructed to search and finds that this room is just like the others, broken, scattered, and unruly. He nips about the room, picking up objects that could have clues like some ceramic that Dion figures used to be a quite beautiful vase. Under the bed, there doesn't seem to be anything but a torrent of dust. He flips over a picture frame and finds a portrait of who he assumes to be Mr. and Mrs. Miller, with Ben II and Jenny Miller at the wedding. This stands out as odd, as every room he has investigated has had pictures removed or destroyed. Could someone have left this behind on purpose? Dylan flips over into the picture frame and finds a portrait of Mr. and Mrs. Miller reading a book together to their grandchildren. Now, knowing the context, the image causes Dylan's heart to sink with a tight discomfort. "The quarrels that money can bring often leave children poor in heart," he says to himself, a clawed hand gently brushing over the faces of the grandchildren. Other than that, Dylan sees the windows broken. By the look of it, someone threw a rock through the window and shattered it. He easily tracks the trajectory and finds it against the wall. When he picks it up, a voice in his head says, "I'm sorry, Father. You'll know where to find me if you survived." Now cut to the rest of the party. After Bromgus asks if he should be alert, Mr. Miller reassures Bromgus that caution is no longer needed for the time being. The helmed horror is now nothing but a pile of cold melted metal. He asks Vidalia to revert the magical ladder to normal. Everyone watches as she holds her right arm out and tenses her shoulders as she does so. You hear the sound of the house shifting and wooden beams falling into place. The party, astounded by the display of magic, unleashes another wave of questioning, which Mr. Miller answers. "The dispute started 2 months ago, the day after I had the will changed. They left me here under the assumption I had died. That is, until I contacted Vidalia to send out her familiar to search for help from old allies about 2 weeks ago. And she did not return from her expedition, and we have been unsuccessful in summoning her again." He pauses for a moment and gives Vidalia a mournful but respectful nod. "Soon after Vidalia came here to get answers, we sent out those letters to all of you, and we began training on manipulating the house's magic. We were to deactivate the magical elevator, as there was no use for that without access to the other floors, but we were suddenly interrupted by those things." He waves at the staircase and points out a part of the wall where the peeling wallpaper is a different pattern. "This once led to the 3rd floor that will come back with the retrieved relics," he says with a crooked smile to Quirin and Trist. "This house will hold many wonders and luxuries once restored." The artifacts were magical items made or found by adventurers such as myself and my old friends that have since passed on. They are mostly utilitarian. A fountain that will serve any drink you wish. Dimensions of space available in a pocket. A magical heart that encourages the flow of magic. A defense and surveillance system that would make the most paranoid beholder blush, and my pride and joy. My forge for magical tinkering. His expressions become hopeful and energetic. It seems reminiscing about the best years of his life has sprung some life back into his step. The party members that escort Mr. Miller now find themselves back on the ground floor. Miller points at the kitchen to direct everyone present there and sits down on one of the unbroken chairs. He points out where the kettle, water, and tea are. Now the party faces their greatest challenge yet, brewing tea. Zalara lights up and her eyes twinkle as Miller mentions the forge. I was hoping we could have a forge. In a slightly confused tone, she continues, but isn't that quite a large thing to just walk away with? In the meantime, Quirin sets the water to boil while putting together all the newly learned details so they make sense in his head. His focus breaks the second Zalara asks her question, and he can't help but chuckle softly. That's a fair question. It's difficult to imagine how one could simply take such a thing and leave. He then searches through the cupboards, and when he is pleased with his findings, Quirin quickly prepares a warm cup of tea for everyone in the kitchen, and as he hands out the cups, he says, I hope you'll forgive me the liberty I took in preparing your beverages this way, but I assure you, this blend should satisfy any taste. Dylan pockets the rock and returns to the others. He waits, listening intently, showing interest in the interests of others. Mr. Miller chuckles and smiles. He points to a window with a potted plant that is beside the water spout. Move the potted plant and you'll find an empty cubic slot. I made modular enchantments. That is how you make magical items truly portable. If you put the forge module, it would even transform this place into a weird kitchen forge hybrid. That's not all. What really matters is the pure chaos flames retrieved from the plane of fire and the tools forged from adamantium. He says excitedly before accepting the brewed tea from Quirin. Thank you, my boy. It smells lovely. Welcome, Diorn. Come, join us for some tea. Dahlia, did we have any baked goods before we were ambushed? I know you mentioned you like to bake. Dahlia blushes and turns to the cupboard. I think there should be some strawberry scones left over. They're a little on the toasty side since I'm still learning. Please enjoy. I'll try to make better ones next time for everyone. She brings out a plate of a dozen scones with strawberry frosting. They look a tad overcooked, but nowhere near inedible. Trist quietly sips his tea, allowing the aroma to wash over him as he contemplates the events of the day. Then pauses, eyes wide, gazing at Vidalia through steam, fleeing the hot liquid in his cup. What's a scone? He asks, slipping from his seat and returning with his new strawberry-covered treasure, faster than what should be possible. Hey, it really does taste like strawberry. I used to borrow strawberries from Farmer Garn back home when I was a kid. He sure did like to chase me back in those days. Never understood why, since he wasn't so good at moving his legs fast, but I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I never asked. Little Kenner pauses long enough to take another bite, then looks around the room at his companions with a big smile on his face. So, what's next? Mr. Miller turns to Tristan and gives him a hearty chuckle. I certainly wouldn't chase you around, youngling. You've got a lot of energy behind your steps. He takes a bite out of his scone as well and gives a smile to Vidalia. Zalara, barely noticing the scones, has all her attention on the magic. Modular enchantment slots for transformation magic. That's amazing. That sounds like a fun thing to have on a weapon, or better yet, my tools, she says with great enthusiasm. Then, mostly talking to herself, she continues. I wonder if I can incorporate something like that in my armor. Miller turns to Zalara in response to her curiosity. You certainly could, although it would need to be refined in some way to make the cubes even smaller or have less enchantments. It is certainly worth working through. My old notes are likely with one of the artifacts. Those would be key to your goals. Bromgus tries the scone. Too spicy for me. Plain hardtack is what I prefer. He pulls an extremely dry piece of hardtack from his bag. Simple enough. I always keep a few weeks' works with me. He munches the dry biscuit, crumbs sticking in his mustache. This is all very fancy, Mr. Mahler. How did you come to build such a place? Where did you find all these rare things? He looks with suspicion at his tea. I always say the best tea is cold tea. Hot water makes my mustache. He blushes slightly. Frizzy. Vidalia, still embarrassed, says, Oh, I'm sorry, Bromgus, if I made them too spicy. Then she whispers, though I don't remember adding a spicy ingredient. An idea runs through her head and she excitedly says, Next time, I'll make banana-flavored ones. Those have a simpler taste you might enjoy. Quirn smiles at Bromgus. Don't you worry about your magnificent mustache, my friend. I can assure you that this beverage tastes good even if you let it run cold. My sister, who created this blend, made sure of that. He then turns to Trist, who's stuffing a scone into his mouth, and says, I believe we might need to retrieve some items from the maze that were mentioned earlier. Especially now that we have a map. His head nods towards Bromgus. Quirn takes a long sip from his cup, his eyes closing as his mind takes him somewhere else for a brief moment. This was an old family home I decided to enchant after I retired from my old adventuring days. I cannot say where I found each individual item as it was so long ago, but I can tell you that most of them used to be relics from deep dark dungeons with unspeakable terrors. I then found ways to transfer the magical power to those cubes. Dylan presents the stone he had found in Ben's room, handing it to Mr. Miller with a sad smile. He turns to Quirn after his comment about the maze as he also takes a stone from Diolan, not thinking much of it. Yes, the maze should provide... He's cut off by the voice echoing in his mind. Ben, The old man becomes shaky and he turns away from the party, setting down both his cup and the stone. His demeanor from mere seconds ago has completely shifted. He seemed to be finally warming up to you all, and now it seems he can't stand to be seen this way by any of you. Vidalia walks over to him to investigate what went wrong. Mr. Miller turns to Vidalia with a pained look, and tears stream down his eyes. Ben is a coward. Couldn't even stand and fight for his old man. Vidalia, if you could please take our guests to get the safe from the maze, I'd like to get settled in for the night. Thank you, Diolan, for finding this. Diolan comes up beside Mr. Miller and places a hand on his shoulder. In his head, Mr. Miller hears, Yes, children, I am no expert on your family, but think of what standing up for you might have meant for them. He pauses for a second, then out loud, Diolan says, Fear for oneself is cowardly, but fear for another may be loving or caring. Diolan backs away, giving the man some space, and starts heading outside. I will meet you all there. Just have to feed an ass. He whistles as he is leaving. With that hard-hitting message, we will pick up next time. Poor old Miller's heart was shattered that night. Let's hope the party can set things right.